Welcome into the Rockies Insider. I'm your Rockies Insider, Patrick Lyons, with plenty of news on those Colorado Rockies, the 2025 postseason, and the 2025 World Series. But for the Colorado Rockies, this could be the week where their future changes forever. They are set to interview several candidates, and with a few off days before the start of the World Series on Friday, perhaps now is the time they might even make that announcement. Now, I sort of doubt that the announcement will be made this week. They'll probably wait until after the World Series. They do want to get that done before the GM meetings next month, and obviously before the winter meetings down in Orlando, just after the second weekend in December, basically December 8th through 10th. And they've got three candidates. Now, if you were listening this past week, a big thank you, big shout out, major props to my buddy Skylar Timmons, substituting, came off the bench, did an excellent job. You know Skylar Timmons from Purple Row, Affected by Altitude. Go check out their podcast if you're listening to this on Monday, or even if you're listening to this on Tuesday, Wednesday, go back and listen to his show. It drops every Monday morning with Evan Lang, also of Purple Row. Skylar did an amazing job breaking down the reported three candidates that the Rockies are set to possibly make an offer on the open GM position vacated by Bill Schmidt 3 days after the end of the regular season. They might even make one of those gentlemen they're not finalists exactly yet, but those three reported names, they might even make one of them the president of baseball operations, which is a title that is considered higher than the GM. And in baseball, I've talked about this before in the past few weeks, few months, as we were gearing up towards a new head of the front office for the Rockies, that in baseball, they're always creating new titles because you cannot hire a manager that is currently a manager of another team, or a GM that is a GM of another team. You have to promote them in some capacity. So they're always creating new branches on the hiring tree, if you will. So president of baseball operations, one notch above GM. And the three candidates are all good. Skylar broke them down to reiterate who they are. James Click, the man on our thumbnail, the clickbait, the literal clickbait. Vice president of baseball strategy, currently with the Toronto Blue Jays, was there in charge as the GM of the Houston Astros when they won their World Series in 2022. Now, not the true and only and major architect of that run. That was Jeff Lunau back in the early 2010s when he set about putting forth the tanking strategy for the Astros that netted them so many great draft picks, great players. They also made some very shrewd trades to improve the future of their franchise, which they are still reaping the rewards of to this day. They would be reaping those rewards a little bit more had they actually come through and won the NL West, or won the AL West, or gotten to the postseason this year. Very, very close. But even still, a decade after Jeff Lunau said about his tanking strategy, Astros still very relevant. Rockies, unfortunately, did not have such a strategy and will not have the same amount of success to show for their 3 consecutive 100-loss seasons. But James Click, a guy who, sure, he was number one. He was the GM when the Astros won the World Series. So give him credit for that. Some of the things that I've heard behind the scenes sounds like he might not actually be a great candidate for what Dick Monfort typically likes in his employees. Does he rub people the wrong way? Look, you're going to have those kind of issues. You're going to have people that butt heads, especially when you have a strong mind, especially when you have a vision of something. Does Dick Monfort want to have somebody else's vision? Is the next GM going to get that opportunity? I want to talk so much more about that. But James Click, arguably the best resume. I think he does have the best resume of the three names that were leaked by Britt Garoli of The Athletic. Felix, first one in the chat, reporting for duty. Good to see you, bud. We also have Scott Sharp, Senior Vice President of the Kansas City Royals. We saw them go from a 100-loss team to a postseason club, 30-plus win turnaround, a rarity in the history of this sport. He was there for that, a small market club, a guy and an organization I should say, an organization that doesn't have the same track record of success on a budget as the Tampa Bay Rays, Cleveland Guardians, Milwaukee Brewers. Not the same level of success, but if you want to feel good and say, hey, this is a guy that's been a part of a few successful campaigns for a small market club, then of course, Scott Sharp, his name is going to be in that conversation. And then the last one, which could, of these three, I would argue might have the best shot at getting this position, whether it's general manager, whether it's president of baseball operations. It's Matt Foreman, assistant general manager of the Cleveland Guardians. So if you talk about the best small market franchises to do it year in and year out, despite the fact that you might not know anybody on the roster. And I'll be honest, there are years in which I do struggle myself to name the active 26-man roster of the likes of the Brewers, Rays, and Guardians. That's just how this game goes for small market clubs that have to get creative with their homegrown players, with players they pick up off the scrap heap. And, no one does that better than the Cleveland Guardians. And Matt Foreman has that really strong track record of seeing that kind of success. Does the fact that Colorado has made a ton of trades with Cleveland and has theoretically had a lot of conversations with Matt Foreman over the last couple years, does that mean anything? Maybe. Now, while it could have value, I certainly wouldn't put a ton of stock in that piece of information that Dick Monfort and the Rockies front office, they're well acclimated. They're very familiar with Matt Foreman. How much is that actually worth? I don't know. I also meant to start off this show by talking, not really talking a lot about the Denver Broncos, but great victory for Bo Nix. Bo Nix leading the Denver football Broncos to a little victory over the New York foosball Giants. That's what we'll call them today, as they lose a very close game. So congrats to the Broncos, making people believe in them. And there's some minor league prospects that are making, some fans really believe. That's a better phrase. Believe in the Rockies' future. And we know about Ethan Holiday, 4th overall pick in this past year's draft. He's going to be a big part, we think, in bringing this club back to relevancy, because one of the things that the Rockies need just about more than anything else, if not as much as many other things, there are so many holes. There are so many areas that they need help. In fact, if you go to justbaseball.com this week, you will see an article written by yours truly about all of the takeaways from this season. They need help in the front office, which they should get. They will get, because unfortunately, not to throw any shade, it really can't get much worse than it's been. So they're going to get that help in the front office. They've got the help down in the minor leagues. They need some help getting some guys, right? Other than Hunter Goodman this past year, who do the Rockies really have that you can rely upon? We thought Tovar and Doyle and Tolia were going to be there. And while I do think Ezekiel Tovar and Bretton Doyle will rebound nicely in 2026, and there are reasons why their 2025 did not go as planned, justifiable reasons too, certifiable reasons why you can't just say, maybe the league caught up with this guy. No. But there are reasons that they really could be dudes, and perhaps Jordan Beck can be in that group. But one of the things they truly need out of an Ethan Holiday and out of Charlie Condon is they need superstars. And they're not going to buy them on the free agent market. How many free agent superstars have the Rockies ever had in their franchise history? I think there's one, Larry Walker. That's it. When Larry Walker became a free agent after the 1994 season, I'm going to talk about him in just a second here, I think. But when he became a free agent and was just let go by Montreal with a year remaining, it was his final year of arbitration, but was too pricey for the Expos. He was, if you look at the free agent hitters that offseason, in the 94-95 offseason, he had the most wins above replacement over the previous 3 seasons. and, was an all-star, two-time Gold Glove Award winner, and he was a all-star. He was an all-star, and he became a superstar. He became a Hall of Famer with the Rockies, but he was an all-star. How many other free agent all-stars have the Rockies truly brought into their fold? They've signed players who have been all-stars, and very few, if any, have ever been an all-star with them. In fact, I had a spreadsheet once. I think it was Andres Galarraga. He was the only player that was ever an all-star before Colorado, during his tenure with the Rockies, and after. And I would be right. And when the Rockies picked him up in 1993, he kind of thought his career was over after his age 31 season with the Cardinals, where he hit 243 after a negative B-WAR season the previous 2 years. 1988 was when he was an all-star with the Expos. Wouldn't be again until 1993. But Galarraga, yes, he was the first superstar of the Rockies, but he wasn't truly a superstar when the Rockies picked them up. So the Rockies need to build and create their own. That's the biggest piece for them, is they need to create superstars. And Ethan Holiday and Charlie Condon are 1A and 1B for the hope for the future of this franchise. And right now, Charlie Condon is doing his thing in the Arizona Fall League. Not sure if you saw what the Rockies prospects did in the Arizona Fall League on Wednesday. It was incredible. It wasn't Ohtani-esque because they don't have any two-way players, but it was impressive. Jared Thomas in that game on Wednesday for the Salt River Raptors went 2 for 4 with a grand slam. And Charlie Condon said, "Hold my beer." And it's okay that he said that because he's 22 years old. But Charlie Condon went 3 for 5 in that game on Wednesday, a double shy of hitting for the cycle, and it included in his final at bat a go-ahead grand slam in the 9th inning to give the Raptors a 12-9 lead. Charlie Condon has got to be making a lot of people out there a believer. Excuse me, I'm doing it again. So I'm sort of curious. Hit me up on social media if you know the answer to this. At Patrick T. Lyons, at Patrick T. Lyons MLB. Has that ever happened in Rockies history? 2 grand slams in a single game. It's never happened by a player. Has it ever happened for 2 players in the same game? And I didn't take as much time as I probably should have to look this up to find out if it had ever happened. I don't think so. Let me rephrase that. My guess is that it's happened twice, but I don't know. So let me know at Patrick D. Lyons on X or Blue Sky or in the chat over on YouTube. In the chat, how do you feel about Jordan Beck? Is he someone we need to stay patient on? Absolutely. You do need to stay patient with him. Now, you could argue this was his first full season in the majors. Now, you look at what his track record was in 2024 and you say, well, that wasn't really a full season because he had only played 55 games that year. And that's true, but he was up for a majority of the season. It just happened that most of the season he was on the IL after making that diving no catch and had to get the plate put in his hand. It was awful. I need to ask him can I see the back of your hand? Because when he showed back up at the end of 2024 and I looked at his hand, it was still raised. It was still up. You could tell there was a plate in his hand. It looked pretty funky. I was kind of surprised he would be able to play on that, but I guess that's a lot of just scar tissue on the back of the hand. So that was odd. That was odd looking on the back of his left hand, his glove hand. So sure, yes, this was his first full season in the majors. And, you saw flashes of, especially with 5 home runs in 36 hours, right? Get sent down to the minors after not getting the job done, after being named to the opening day roster, goes down to Albuquerque, is arguably worse than what he was the first couple weeks with the Rockies, and then comes back and just like that, he is now in the middle of their lineup. So 16 home runs, 53 RBI, not a ton of opportunities, 19 stolen bases you like, but he did get caught stealing 8 times. So not a very good percentage there. That's under 75%, which if you're going to steal, you've got to be able to do it at least at the 75% clip. Slugging percentage, solid, 416, and was still an above average player, a positive B-WAR. Offensively, he was above average for left fielder. A lot of good offensive players there in left field. Defensively, he's still working on some things, but I would say he's probably league average and young enough where he's going to make up for that difference. So I think Jordan Beck is still a huge part of the future of the Rockies. That being said, new GM is looking to try to really build this roster and improve it going forward. If someone comes calling for Jordan Beck and you get the right package of players, that you might have to make that deal. But right underneath that, Hunter Goodman, Ezekiel Tovar, Brenton Doyle tier of position players is Jordan Beck. And you could argue that Jordan Beck is already on that Brenton Doyle tier for the Rockies. So yeah, I would be very patient with Jordan Beck. Be patient with Charlie Condon. There's some swing and miss in there. Overall, the numbers are solid. He's having big games. In fact, on Sunday, he was 2 for 4. You also had Cade Denton with 3 scoreless frames. He needed that after a couple of rough outings. Had 3 perfect frames, in fact, on Sunday for the Rafters in the Arizona Fall League. Had 3 Ks to go along with it. And Wellington Herrera, the 21-year-old lefty, 2 scoreless frames to lower his ERA in the Arizona Fall League to 1.80. Yes, he will be added to the 40-man roster in a month's time. That is going to happen. We'll find out. We will find out. In the chat, what would you say the deepest position in the farm system is right now? That's a good question. Sadly, I'd probably say the deepest position is reliever, which isn't great because that's the one position you can pick up players the cheapest. And the Rockies have done that consistently, really. They've had sort of the magic touch the last few years from Brent Suter. You could argue Alex Colomé for the first part of 2022. So, okay, Alex Colomé in 2022, 2023, Brent Suter, Pierce Johnson there as well. You did pick up Tyler Kinley off the scrap heap after he was waived by the Marlins. And then just this past year, Jimmy Herget waived by the Angels. So I would argue that the relief core, I think, is really strong, and some of it is going to be bolstered by starting pitchers that really don't come to fruition as a starting pitcher. I think you could also argue with Kyle Karros, despite the fact that he is in the majors at third base. There is a lot of strength right now because Kyle Karros is still going to be considered a rookie for 2026. So he's probably going to have the best odds. If you're looking for a Rockies rookie to potentially win the Jackie Robinson Rookie of the Year award, Kyle Karros is going to be in that conversation if he can win the starting role. And even if not, he could get a call up very early on. You do have Ethan Holiday there in the organization. He's a shortstop for right now. Does he eventually move over to third base? Sure, he could end up there. In fact, Ezekiel Tovar, in his own right, if he holds down shortstop, he was the National League Gold Glove Award winner in 2024, was not named a finalist this past year. He did miss 63 games on the IL, so that really hurt his odds of defending his crown. But if Ezekiel Tovar is still the guy at shortstop defensively, then Ethan is going to end up moving over to third base. You got Braylon Wimmer right now doing some things over in the Arizona Fall League. I see him as more of a utility guy. You could argue Ryan Ritter could have a future over at third base or a primary third baseman. So right now the hot corner is really strong. And that's been par for the course for this organization where they've traditionally had a lot of really good third basemen. Just like the Dodgers have traditionally always had really good superstars, Hall of Famers, and Japanese superstars. Yeah, Dodgers win the pennant again, going to the 2025 World Series on the backs of Shohei Ohtani with the greatest single game performance we have ever seen. And he did it while playing kind of poorly. I think going into that game, he went 2 for 4 in game 1 against the Reds of the National League wildcard round. He hit a homer in that game. And then after that, over his next, that would be 8 games, he was like 4 for 32, something like that. He was hitting in the low 100s and then goes out and just does things that only Babe Ruth dreamed he had done in his career. 3 home runs and 10 strikeouts as a pitcher. It's never even happened in a regular season game. Shohei Ohtani bested Shohei Ohtani. The 13th 3-homer postseason game in playoff history. In fact, the 3rd Dodger in a row. Did you realize that? Chris Taylor did it last. Kike Hernandez before him. And now Shohei Ohtani following in a line of great Dodgers players that can play a lot of positions. Actually, that's not true. Shohei Ohtani can't play a lot of positions. He can only play one position, pitcher. So he's not a super utility guy, folks. I'm sorry. Hot takes. Not really. But I mean, was that I should have got a stopwatch because this was an all-time game. It's got to be the greatest 10 minutes in baseball history for any player. Right? Who had a better 10 minutes? 10 minutes in baseball. He records a strikeout for all 3 outs in the top of the first of a must-win game for the opposing team. The Brewers needed to win that game. They needed to get on the board early. They did not. Ohtani strikes out his all 3 outs. He did walk a hitter. Then he doesn't even enter his dugout, straps on the gear, steps into the batter's box to start the game, and lofts a leadoff home run. Absolutely incredible. Incredible. NLCS MVP. He adds this to his trophy case, although it's probably a trophy closet at this point. No, I think his trophies probably fill up the size of a modest Cape Cod house by now. He has a Cape Cod case for his trophies at this point. Unbelievable. While the innocent saying, and they still believe that Todd Helton is still playing first base. The Rockies front office? Is that a dig at Michael Toglia? Could be. But, I mean, what can Ohtani do next? What can he do next? Can he have the best offensive performance by a pitcher in a World Series? Remember, this is his first World Series that he'll be able to pitch. He was in the World Series last year, but still not ready. We thought maybe we were going to see him debut a little more than a year, and I'm sure there were probably plans. I really figured there were going to be plans for that. Didn't happen. I think the Dodgers came close to finishing last year. It was in Colorado, I thought. And my hypothesis was that he was going to pitch at Coors Field, maybe come out of the bullpen, something. He could also be the opener. They did have those rules back then. The Ohtani rule where if your pitcher is also the DH, when the pitcher comes out of the game, he can stay in as the DH. So they could have done that. I thought that would be just really being in the spotlight, taking center stage. We'll just wait a little bit longer. And it's been even better. So could he have the most hits by a pitcher in a World Series game? It's been done 5 times where a pitcher has recorded 3 hits. It was done by Oral Hershiser in Game 2 of the 1988 World Series. 3 hits. Again, he has to do that in the game that he pitches in. Doable to at least tie the record. How about most home runs by a pitcher in a World Series game? The record is 1. There wasn't someone that did it back in the 40s or something like that. Last time someone did it was Joe Blanton in the 2008 World Series for the Phillies. How about RBIs by a pitcher in a World Series game? Dave McNally had 4 ribbies in Game 3 of the 1970 World Series for the Orioles. And the most total bases by a pitcher in a World Series game, Dutch Ruther, 1919 in the Black Sox World Series, where they threw the World Series. Cincinnati Reds, that's who he did. He had 7 in that game. No one's ever had a 4-homer game in the World Series. No one's ever done that. We've had 3 homer games. Babe Ruth did it twice, 26 and 28. Reggie Jackson did it in 1977. Then we went a while and it felt like we probably were never going to see it. And then we saw it in back-to-back years. Albert Pujols in 2011. So if you're keeping tabs, I've named 3 Hall of Famers. Babe Ruth, Reggie Jackson, Albert Pujols. And then 1 year after Pujols did it, Pablo Sandoval, 2012. All right, he's not going to the Hall of Fame, but they did make a movie about him. It was called Kung Fu Panda. He could potentially even have a relief outing combined with a clutch hit. Could Ohtani do something like that? We'll see. And you know what? Dave Roberts' comments is this hasn't really seemed to get a ton of traction, which maybe is good, maybe not. I figured it also did come on what was it, Friday night when they clinched. We had no game on Saturday. So, the talking heads didn't really get an opportunity to chew on this. They probably will starting Monday. But in the celebration on stage in front of a microphone, Dave Roberts said, "Let's get 4 more wins and really ruin baseball." How could Dave Roberts say such a thing? It was intended as a joke, and it was a joke. It is a joke. The Dodgers are not ruining baseball. I'll say that again. The Dodgers are not ruining baseball. They may be impacting your enjoyment of baseball ever so slightly, and for the negative, right? It's impacting it for the negative, but they're not ruining baseball. And I've got a lot to say about this and the state of baseball and any impending lockout that may happen after next season, but that's for a different day. If you've got questions in the chat, fire away. Fire away. It's the Rockies Insider with your Rockies Insider, Patrick Lyons, talking about the 2025 World Series, new managers in the NL West, and what the Rockies are going to do with their next GM and a new role impending for the Rockies. A new role that really could impact the future of this franchise. And over the weekend, I found it interesting that no matter the odds on the World Series, no matter who the Dodgers were going to end up playing, whether it was the Mariners, Blue Jays, didn't matter. Dodgers, heavy favorites, minus 210 against the Mariners, minus 220, minus 215 against the Jays, and Dodgers having basically 70% odds of winning the World Series. And I mean, yeah, that feels about right no matter who they would play. In fact, even if you put aside the Mariners and the Blue Jays and you just had like the best of the American League and you combine the Mariners and Blue Jays, I still would probably pick the Dodgers. Now they would need like 6 games at that point because, how well is this roster of two teams coming together? How can they gel? How can they have cohesion? I don't know that they can. But the Dodgers are they're set for a course to take over the world. They did last year. They're going to again. I'll preview that, of course, on Friday's show. But last week, a couple things talking with my good buddy Kevin Henry. First off, I said, and I imagine you out there felt the same as well. The fact that the Brewers were 6-0 against the Dodgers in the regular season, it meant nothing to me. I imagine it meant nothing to you, and it meant nothing to the LA Dodgers, who swept in 4 games. We also talked about a potential frontrunner for the Rockies who had ties with folks within the organization. And by the organization, I do mean a special assistant to the GM in Todd Helton. And I mostly meant the roster: Seth Halverson, Chase Dollander, and Jordan Beck. And that was head coach of the University of Tennessee, Tony Vitello. Over the weekend, it was pretty much a done deal that he was going to be the next manager of the San Francisco Giants, a rookie to professional baseball, had done the college baseball circuit, was previously at the University of Missouri, had done a ton of jobs. And once in a while, there are guys like this who come from the college ranks that can have success in the majors. And Buster Posey, look, he is running this team as he sees fit, and he is pushing all of the buttons. I wouldn't say they've been all of the right buttons so far, but he is pushing all of the buttons. And Bob Melvin is a manager's manager. He's out. Sure, it was a disappointing season for the Giants, but you have to think the next manager of the Giants, Tony Vitello or otherwise, right? If we go back in time and say, do the Giants want a manager's kind of manager to navigate this current roster to the postseason, or do they want a manager that can manage a clubhouse and take orders from upon high? Because there's a lot of front offices that make the roster, that make the lineups and make a lot of decisions. It's something Torey Lovello talked about at the end of this past season that his front office makes a lot of the lineups. And I don't want to say handcuffs Torey Lovello, but they're seeing things and they are doing things on a much larger scale. And so they might say, these are the players we need to be playing X amount of times a week and get this many at-bats. Where those at-bats come in, you can decide. But this is what we need to happen. Rather than, here's our roster, do with it as you will. Not a lot of managers really get that opportunity. In fact, I don't think any do in today's day and age. I don't even think Dave Roberts has that opportunity. I really don't. Front runners for other jobs around Major League Baseball for the Padres. It's AJ Ellis, Ryan Flaherty, and Scott Service. By the time you're even listening to this, maybe the announcement's already been made. There was an interesting podcast someone shared with me featuring some Cardinals greats, Matt Holliday, Kyle Gibson, maybe not a Cardinal great, but he was a Cardinal. Lance Lynn, and they were discussing Mike Schilt, and I was really surprised that some of the things that they said, now they weren't trashing him, but they did sort of confirm and suggest that he's got a track record, Schilt, that is, of having issues with people and might not be, a people person, to say the least. And so I was just surprised hearing it from this group. Again, they weren't trashing him, but I feel like when you consider, how much protective language is typically used in professional sports when discussing certain topics like this, they weren't using that protective language. Atlanta, we got John Gibbons, David Ross, and Walt Weiss as three of the top candidates. For the Orioles, Ryan Flaherty, who's got some experience with the Orioles, Tony Mansolino, who was the interim manager once Brandon Hyde was let go earlier this season, and Ricky Weeks, who has been a key part of Pat Murphy's coaching staff, even when Craig Counsell was the manager for the Milwaukee Brewers. The Angels, they've got Albert Pujols, Torrey Hunter, Bob Melvin, and one more former Angel, Darren Erstad, as the top candidates. I continue to see Bud Black's name appearing on a lot of these lists. Atlanta is the highest that I've seen it as of late, 25-1. Nick Hundley was a name I was seeing a ton of, and I'd heard certain whispers about his name. No longer a candidate. He actually withdrew his name from the Giants position, which is not a total surprise. He's actually done it in the past. He's got some young children, and similar to Matt Holliday, he wants to be home. He's not ready to return to the dugout and take on that rough 187-day schedule. Now, the schedule, that's the regular season schedule. That doesn't even include spring training. 162 games, but I believe there's 100, maybe actually it's 182 days of the season. That's a lot. That's really, really a lot. I should have mentioned that Monday, October 20th, back in 1999, it was Larry Walker. Nope. Strike that from the record. Take two. October 20th, 1999, Colorado introduced Buddy Bell as the franchise's third ever manager. First on Baylor, Jim Leland for 1 year. Then Buddy Bell had a 161, 185 record. Did have a winning season in the year 2000, just under that mark in 2001, and then let go after 22 games. Started off 6-16 in 22. Clint Hurdle took over for that spot. Buddy Bell did get another chance to manage after the Rockies, was a manager for parts of 3 seasons with Detroit from 96 to 98, and did get a chance to manage the Royals in 2005 through 2007. And I want to bring up Buddy Bell's name, not just because, yes, the Rockies have had 2 managers named Buddy, but to say that Buddy Bell, I mentioned this before in the pod, but we're approaching that Hall of Fame season where we need some evergreen topics to talk about because there might not be a ton of news in the baseball world. But Buddy Bell, parts of 18 seasons in the majors, was a 5-time All-Star, won the Silver Slugger Award only once, 6-time Gold Glove Award winner. And when you look at a metric like JAWS, which is Jay Jaffe's win share system, not wins above replacement, but it uses wins above replacement. When you look at something like JAWS that evaluates players from different eras, Buddy Bell is the 15th greatest third baseman of all time. I'll say that again. Buddy Bell, the Rockies' third ever manager, the 15th greatest third baseman of all time. By comparison, Nolan Arenado right now, with his best days behind him, will not catch Buddy Bell. Buddy Bell has had a better career than Nolan Arenado. Might be hard to believe, but according to Jaws, Buddy Bell higher than Nolan Arenado. Evan Longoria is retired. Buddy Bell had a better career than him. Jose Ramirez, Manny Machado, still going. They got a little ways to go to catch him. I think they probably will. Jose Ramirez almost certainly. Manny Machado certainly as well. But 15th all time for third baseman, Buddy Bell. How about that? In the chat, what do you think about Nick Hundley pulling his name out of the Giants job? Going to be on a list for the other clubs. As I said, you want to keep your name out there. You want to be relevant. You also want to see what other positions that might exist in different front offices. So while he's not ready to do the grind of that 8.5-month season, even more than that, it goes far beyond just, spring training to the regular season. And if you do it right, the postseason. But it's a lot. It's a lot to do that day in and day out. And you don't get a ton of time with your family. It's rough. It's a grind. It really is. And yeah, for players, it's an opportunity to make money to last your entire life, to make a name for yourself, to then make more money later on down the line. Certainly not the same amount of money you made when you were active. But for coaches, it's different. It's a lifestyle choice. And so for Nick Hundley, it's, hey, here are some of the ideas I have about being a manager. And also, what other positions do you have? Right? I mean, he has worked in some front offices, I believe, in the past. So, could there be some other positions, a special assistant roles? Could it just be scouting and kind of keeping that plate spinning, saying, these are some of the ideas I have. I've got a lot of people that do want me. And, I don't know where his family is stationed right now. I imagine, is it where he grew up? So he went to high school in Washington, was born in Oregon. He went to school in Arizona. So, where does he live? Could this be more of a, I'm navigating to possibly get my dream job for my family? Because if he's still in Arizona, how much longer does Torey Lovullo have? Maybe he can get a job in the NL West for his hometown team. And then all of a sudden, he can still be a dad and be a manager. Maybe. If it's Seattle, I think Dan Wilson's got a hold on that job right now as the manager of the Mariners for a little while. Even if there's an expansion franchise in Portland, again, that's a ways off. But even still, that is something that is a plate he probably has to keep spinning. So some of the other news that have come out of 20th and Blake Street for the Colorado Rockies is as follows. Patrick Saunders of the Denver Post reporting that the Rockies are looking to add a new position in their front office, a CRSO. What in the world is a CRSO? It's a Chief Revenue and Strategy Officer. The role would be created to help grow revenues for the organization, for the franchise, and to allow those revenues to be reinvested back into the baseball operations in the team. What does that mean exactly? Well, I think you could look at it in two ways, right? There's pros and there are cons. And I see more pros than cons in this, because even in a worst case scenario of having a little good and a little bad, there's still good coming out of this. So I see this as a positive move. The straight pros are, you now have someone that is in charge of setting a budget for investments into the club's behind the scene infrastructure. And you have to invest in analytics. And now they finally will, at least a little bit. So it gives you hope. You have to invest in analytics. You have to invest in things that are going on behind the scenes. Those things are critical in all of professional sports, maybe more so in baseball. And while the Rockies have dipped their toe into it, certainly they invested in the lab down at Salt River Fields in Scottsdale, home of their spring training facility. It's still not enough. The Rockies are still a decade behind most other teams in baseball. Now, can they make up for that? And maybe in 5 years' time, be caught up with like the second tier of teams? Maybe. If all goes well, maybe. And perhaps with this CRSO, this chief revenue and strategy officer, they maybe can start to have that kind of money. It also means that you've got someone who's in charge of seeing how they could use the cash cow known as Coors Field for more events to further increase their revenue. Is this going to be someone that's going to help push for another NHL Stadium Series game? Believe it or not, they don't just give those out. You do need people to like stump and go to NCAA saying, hey, we want to do this, we want to do that. Maybe we see an NHL Stadium Series game. I got ahead of myself. I'm talking about the Coors Bowl. Yes. Could we have a college football game at Coors Field? The weather's going to be a crapshoot, certainly, but who cares? It's a game at Coors Field, one of the baseball cathedrals in a great major city like Denver. There's not a ton of major cities that host bowl games. Handful. They're great. But, one as fun as Denver, Vegas. There are a handful. But you could get an NHL Stadium Series game, more events like it's not Top Golf, but they've got golf coming. They're already doing that. Maybe they can do more of that. Maybe they can have some kind of winter carnival. I've said it before on podcasts, and I could have sworn this was in the original press release. Maybe not. But could you open up the rooftop during the off season or on weekends when there's no games? Particularly in the off season, if you could go out to a major league ballpark on a sunny day, be up in the rooftop, hanging out, looking down on a ballpark, who would not want to go? Who would not want to go? I know plenty of people that don't drink alcohol that would kill to just be at a ballpark and charge me $5 a soda. I don't care. $10 mozzarella sticks, whatever. Oh, there's only 3 mozzarella sticks. I don't care. I just want to be here at a ballpark and get a view of the sunset and the mountains, the Rocky Mountains. Maybe these are some of the things that the CRSO is going to do. You may have also seen this past week that Coors Field is getting a new turf this offseason. First offseason since 2019 and 2020. Is this why Coors Field is getting a new turf? To possibly have a bowl game? The Coors Bowl? It would be great if it was the Rockies Bowl. Like they're trying to further their brand nationally. It's Colorado Rockies. Is that why they're getting a new turf? No, the turf has been beat up. There's been a lot of concerts the last few years to further increase revenue as attendance has taken somewhat of a hit, or the revenue that comes from attendance has taken a hit, still averaged over 30,000 for the 80 dates, not 81 dates, as you might see in other places online. So they averaged 30,000, but the average ticket price was down. A lot of deals, a lot of sales. Rockies trying to get people in through the front door. So they've had a lot more concerts than in the past. And the turf has taken a beating. If you went out to a game this year, I think you really noticed it. I think you really began to notice it. There was one game that I went to with my wife. My wife and I hadn't gone to a game together since 2019. I like covering the game. I like my seat in the press box. And so she said, are we ever going to go to a game again? All right, well, we'll go this year. You can say you saw potentially one of the games, one of the losses for a team that could lose more games than any other. But standing up on the rooftop, you get a different view of the grass. And boy, oh boy, there were a lot of ruts, a lot of discolored grass, spray painted over. Now, the Coors Field ground crew does an incredible job. I think some of the damage done to the turf you could even see on television. All of which is besides the point. The crew does an incredible job. It would be even worse if you had anybody else running the grounds crew. But Mark does an amazing job doing that, and it was just time for a new turf. So turf, this current turf would not have survived a bowl game, I think, in, let's say, December of 2026. And then you can't put new turf down after that game. So you got to handle it now to make your stadium more appealing for next year. Is that going to be part of it? I don't know. But potentially there could be more revenue for Coors Field when the Rockies aren't in town. I love this note too in the chat. Ball Arena has a new $5 food menu. Yeah, for Nuggets and Avs. I've seen this a lot. I mean, the Rockies kind of have that already. It's been pretty consistent, but even still, like that's great, making it very, very affordable. And does this mean that the Avs and Nuggets are about to kind of go down in the win column? And so we're trying to get ahead of this thing now? No, not necessarily. But the Rockies have always had, very fair prices for sure. They've always been very fair. But side note, this has to be the worst life of a baseball turf in the history of the Rockies. Certainly that's an easy bar to clear. But it may be the worst turf life of any turf in baseball history. Besides being home to a 119 loss team, of which 56 losses came at home. Only 7 teams in the history of the game have ever lost more than 56 games at home. We're talking about a team that has lost 100 games in 3 consecutive seasons, and not to mention its first season as a turf in 2020, it experienced a pandemic. And the final performance on that turf at Coors Field, not a 3-1 victory over the Los Angeles Angels, but a Paul McCartney concert. Go figure. All right. So what are the cons of the chief revenue and strategy officer? Maybe this becomes another person in the room of the front office who will support Dick Monfort and saying, hey, we really can't do all the stuff you'd like in terms of beefing up the analytics department. This is the money we've got. This is all the money we've got. That's the con. But if the CRSO is bringing in new revenue, then that's more money you can allot to the analytics department, which is a good thing, which is a very good thing for sure. The question I have too for every Rockies fan out there in regards to this new front office taking shape is, do the Rockies need to go outside the organization for every position they need to fill? And should they do that? Should they be doing that? Maybe I'll talk about that tomorrow. I do want to congratulate the new board over at the Rocky Mountain Sabre. Congrats to new president Joe Ohtani, who takes over for John Salvino. John stepped up when our previous president stepped aside somewhat abruptly, and John was wonderful. Honored to serve as his vice president for the past 2 years, and excited to see how the new blood collaborates with one another. Lots of good new blood for Rocky Mountain Sabre. I've mentioned them before. They have some wonderful events throughout the year, and every month, the third Wednesday of every month, they gather at Stoney's Bar and Grill on Lincoln in Denver. Next one won't be until November 19th. We just missed it this past week, but I highly recommend you go out because there's some outstanding baseball folks there, not just great fans, but there have been some former ball players who have showed up in the past, people who have worked for the Rockies in a scouting capacity, that have worked for security. We've had members who have housed Rockies when they first came to Denver as rookies in a program that no longer exists. One of our board members, in fact, was basically a den father to the likes of Charlie Blackmon and Matt Holliday when they first came to Denver as rookies and said, hey, you need a place to stay? Come stay with me. I'll show you the ropes for a little bit. And it still keeps in touch with those guys. So Rocky Mountain Sabre, just a wonderful organization. We're lucky that their home is in Denver. Sure, they represent Wyoming, Montana, I think even parts of New Mexico. It's probably too broad. So I feel bad for the folks that are, very north of Denver or just outside of Denver, even on the western slope. But Third Wednesday of every month, Rocky Mountain Saber gets together, and you got to check it out. Stoney's Bar and Grill, some great baseball people. There's a baseball card club. You could sign up, be a member, and never attend. There's some wonderful stuff on the saber.org website as well. Highly recommend you check it out. Please do that. Yeah, Felix, that's a good advantage. Letting that grass grow. Also, if you have a lot of ground ball pitchers, maybe let the infield grass grow a little bit more as well. That could help. Does that help making barehanded plays at third base? Just saying. Rockies Insider with me, your Rockies Insider, Patrick Lyons, talking about Dick Monfort being incredibly happy for the Los Angeles Dodgers. Is he? Probably. He's got to be, right? He's got to be. The latest must read over at Purple Row, Tarek Skubal to the Rockies, and what you should reasonably expect from the next leader of the Rockies front office. If you've been listening to the Rockies Insider, I've asked this question, and I don't know how much I'm going to answer it now, because it really is up to you to answer as a Rockies fan. How much do the Rockies need to go outside the organization for their front office positions, or how many people from outside the organization do they need to fill those open positions? And should they? Should they for every single one of those openings? There's 3 to 4 key positions right now that are opening. First being the head of baseball operations, president of baseball operations, POBO. I've said it before, if they're going to tab a GM from another club, you've got to give that person the title of president of baseball ops to represent the promotion. Got to do that. Then from there, you can still have a general manager. A lot of teams have both a president of baseball operations and a general manager. The POBO is running the show. The GM is, I don't want to say, his secretary, but not the same power, not the same authority. But you could still add a general manager. That one, it's not as clear if they will do that should they hire a POBO, because it really comes down to if Dick Monfort is willing to pay another person some of that executive money. They still have to pay some executive money to an assistant general manager. So maybe you get 2 of the 3, and maybe you promote an assistant general manager over the course of the 2026 season or next off season. I don't know. So are we going to get a president of baseball operations and a GM? This is the kind of thing that Dick Monfort should be willing to do and spend that extra bit of money, because the more you invest behind the scenes, the more you can save in front of the scenes. Chris Bryant, anyone? You need more baseball-minded voices in the room to make baseball-minded decisions. I don't think anyone up for any of these jobs, or anyone that has ever worked in a front office, is not thinking about the business side of baseball. I don't think there's anybody right now in the Tampa Bay Rays organization going, you know who we should get this offseason? Pete Alonso and Tarek Skubal, and sign him to a big extension, and Freddie Peralta and Alex Bregman and Bo Bichette. All right, how about maybe 3 of those 5 guys? There's nobody in the Rays front office that would suggest that. And in fact, if they had the keys to the car, they wouldn't do that, because that's not a smart move. That's not a reality of their situation. I think the Rockies are aware of that. I think they might be selling you this idea that, again, someone from the outside, it's going to be hard for them to adjust, because they don't know Coors Field like we know Coors Field. But they're doing it anyway. So they're dancing between the raindrops, because I think there's a lot of importance right now for the Rockies to have somebody that is familiar with altitude and familiar with Coors Field. I think there's a portion of the fan base that is worried that if you bring in a very large front office crew, let's say it's all 3, POBO, GM, assistant GM, and you bring in some other folks, in some of the higher positions in the front office, maybe even for drafting and developing, that they'll lose sight of a lot of the things that the Rockies have learned about playing at altitude. There are certain things that you can't do in Denver, but I also think that a lot of the things that have been done in Denver in the past, I don't know that a lot of people really want to go back and try it again. Mistakes have been made, sure, but not all mistakes that have been made should never be attempted again. Yes, right now it appears as if you should just never give a big contract to a starting pitcher, especially now when, they're getting very exorbitant. But is there going to be a day in which the Rockies are players for an ace in free agency? There will come a day in which that absolutely will happen. How does that happen? What do we know in the future that we don't know now? Well, I don't have that answer. But to say that the Rockies should never do that again, I think is missing the point. Just because you try things once doesn't mean it will never happen again because it failed that one time. So I think you need a mix. I think you need a little bit of a mix of people that are familiar with Denver. They don't need to be familiar with it right now. They don't have to be a part of this current 2025 front office and get a raise. But maybe they were previously with the team. That's one of the reasons why Thad Levine is such an interesting candidate for GM, because of his previous history and ties with the Rockies. That makes him interesting, to say the least. Andy McKay is someone that has spent a little bit of time, the assistant GM of the Seattle Mariners. You would love the success. You would love him, someone who's had success in a smaller market, doing it in a very unique way. Mariners have had to do it a unique way. So one of the issues that the Rockies could have going forward with anyone that they bring in from the outside, and this was part of a conversation that I had, I'll say, with someone with ties to the front office and who could potentially be in line for one of the higher positions in the Rockies front office. But one of the issues with bringing in somebody that has had success from a smaller market team, like the Milwaukee Brewers, Cleveland Guardians, and Tampa Bay Rays, I'll use them specifically, but I think you could also include the Seattle Mariners there, is that will Dick Monfort allow that next president of baseball operation, general manager, will they let that person do what worked in Milwaukee, Tampa Bay, Cleveland, and Seattle? Because what those teams did was they traded their best players when they were at their peak value. Roster turnover. It happens a lot. Cleveland sold at this year's trade deadline and then still were able to make the postseason. That's how good they are. That's how realistic they are, that they could both sell and make it to the postseason. We've never seen that before. We've never seen that. The Guardians just did that. So is Dick Monfort going to let his people make those kind of decisions? He doesn't care for roster turnover. He's loyal to a fault. He said it himself. So how can someone from Milwaukee, Tampa, Seattle, Cleveland, how can they do their job if those strategies that they utilized in those places are removed as an option? How can they do that? That's what we'll find out. And I think there's the trepidation that anyone might have for the next person in charge of the Rockies is that unless there's immediate success, also, I don't know how you would quantify that. How are you going to have immediate success with this franchise? I don't know. I don't really know what immediate success looks like. And that's okay. But it could be really 2 years, after 2027, will we have an idea if the new architect is doing well, like really well? So it's going to take time. It's certainly something that is going to take time, and it's gonna be hard to suss out whether or not that plan for the new person in charge is truly a good one. There were a lot of people that gave Bill Schmidt the benefit of the doubt immediately, saying, "Hey, all right, let's not be critical of this decision." When there's a difference between being critical of of a decision, the decision of promoting someone who was coming off a not so good track record within an organization that was really struggling to find a voice and clearly not having a plan in place and just again promoting from within. There's the critical decision, and then there's the person. Sure, we'll give the person the opportunity, but promoting Bill Schmidt at that time, I there was a lot of people around baseball that while they liked Bill Schmidt and he's a good baseball man and he was always fair and kind with his time, always called me back whenever I placed a call and had a question about something. Always great baseball guy. But was the role maybe too big for him? Perhaps. Or maybe the role was perfect for what Dick Monfort wanted out of his number two, out of his GM. But there was 2 years there, I think, where everyone was saying, "Hey, I like what Bill Schmidt's doing." And there was really nothing to point at that was part of any plan. There were individual moves that were good on their own, but there really just lacked a certain vision. And so it's going to be 2 years until we can see whether or not there even is a vision for this GM or this president of baseball operations. And if there is one, is it really a good one? Is there truly a plan in place other than, hey, let's get better. Hey, let's all pull the rope going in the same direction. Hey, let's let these guys figure it out. Let's play the young guys. That's not a plan so much as it is a fallback, so much as it is this is the only option that we have right now is to talk a talk, but it really doesn't mean anything. And so there's trepidation right now, I think, for a lot of Rockies fans because there's a lot of talk. And, Walker Monfort this week with the interviews, he's doing a good job. He is being put up as the poster child for this new era, this new regime. And he's pushed all the right buttons so far. I don't think they have been difficult buttons to push, right? We're not talking about, acquiring a player or, a shrewd trade, something in free agency. There hasn't been anything major. They've been things I think that we all know needed to be done and should be done. And they're attributing that to one person. And maybe that one person really is just doing that on his own. If so, great. That's a good sign. But I don't think it's been enough for a lot of Rockies fans to say, wow, this is great where things are headed. There's talk of things headed in a great direction. We just have to see it. And while we won't see Dick Monfort celebrating the Colorado Rockies, while we won't see Dick Monfort celebrating the Dodgers going to the World Series, he's got to be happy, right? He's got to be happy that the Dodgers are in the World Series. He called it ludicrosity that the Dodgers had this bloated payroll. They had all these superstars. There's a need for a salary cap and salary floor. And the Dodgers are the poster children for everything that's wrong with baseball. And so he's getting his wish because we could have 2 small market teams in the World Series if Milwaukee had moved on, but we're not seeing that. We didn't get that. So if the evil empire continues to win, well, now everyone can get together and try to fight against Darth Vader and try to change the rules so that it makes it more fair for everybody else. When there's not a problem right now with baseball. If you are the other 29 teams, you have a problem with being outmaneuvered, outclassed, out-strategized by the Dodgers. Yeah, but that's not going to continue forever. Other teams can step up. The postseason is a long slog. The real worry is if the Dodgers have figured out the postseason now. Like the regular season it doesn't matter. I said that last Sunday. with Kevin Henry? Like, do they have the cheat code now of basically, look, we're going to win 90 plus games. It's not a problem. If we have to play an extra round in the wild card round, that's fine. We're going to win that too, because we know what the code is in the postseason. That's a hard code. That's a very hard code. But there's not a problem with baseball. This is a much bigger topic, a much longer conversation to have this offseason. But Dick Monfort has gotten what he's wanted. He wanted the Dodgers in the World Series to prove his point. And now maybe they can win back-to-back World Series, the first back-to-back World Series since the 98 through 2000 New York Yankees. We'll see. I mentioned a must-read article over on Purple Row. Joelle Milholm, who, huge fan of hers. She does an incredible job. Article about Allison Krajewski, the performance coach for the High Spokane, and became the first female coach in not only Spokane's history, but in the history of the Colorado Rockies. Fantastic article, worth checking out. Joelle, every article she writes is always intriguing, and she sees baseball through a wonderful lens that we need more people to see, and that needs to be highlighted, shouted from the rooftops, you name it. Speaking of things shouted from the rooftops, and I'm going to get to the chat here in just a second over on YouTube, but Tarik Skubal to the Colorado Rockies, not going to happen. So the Tigers have a big decision this offseason. Are they going to trade what will be their back-to-back AL Cy Young Award winner, Tarik Skubal? They're currently, hundreds of millions of dollars apart on a contract extension. Last offseason, after Skubal had won his first Cy Young Award, Detroit offered him 4 years, $100 million. Look, $25 million a year is a lot of money. He was 2 years out from free agency, so the Tigers were buying out an extra 2 years of free agency. That's still not notable. The Red Sox last offseason, after acquiring Garrett Crochet, gave him a 6-year, $170 million guaranteed contract, also with 2 years remaining before free agency, and a much shorter track record of being a stud starting pitcher. So that gives you an idea how far off the Tigers were with their, hey, we made an offer kind of offer. Not really great. Skubal reportedly interested in $400 million. Will he get it? I don't know. But I think the conversations are going to start there, and I think he could still get $350 million. Back-to-back Cy Young Awards, a lefty starting pitcher, which A, is a rarity, and B, they only get better with age usually. I think he's going to get paid big time this offseason. Again, free agent. He's going to be a free agent after 2026. So he very well could get that money. So by that point, it's going to be 3 years potentially as a Cy Young Award winner. Tigers, they're going to get a compensation draft pick if he leaves in free agency after next year. You may want to go and trade him now, something the Rockies should have done with Trevor Story before the 2021 season. Now, there was one cheeky monkey out there, cheeky Rockies fan, who emailed Monfort about acquiring Tarik Skubal, to which Dick Monfort replied something along the lines of, that would be fun. This person who sent that out, good guy, good Rockies fan, great Rockies fan. I love catching up with him every offseason and seeing what kind of hijinks he's up to. What's going on, Kevin? Not Henry, not Collins. But he said, thanks. We'll see what happens. Not we'll see what happens. No, that Rockies are not getting him. Don't worry. Rockies probably aren't getting Freddie Peralta either, who also could be on the trade market this offseason by the Brewers. $8 million option for next year. That's insanely low. That's what happens when you lock up a young Latin American pitcher to a contract extension. $8 million next year. Look, he made his major league debut at Coors Field on Mother's Day back in 2018. I remember I was actually at Colorado Springs that day talking with some of Freddie Peralta's teammates with the Sky Sox when they were a Brewers AAA affiliate. Brett Phillips was there, and Corbin Burns, actually, I spoke to coincidentally on that day when he was still in the minor leagues, waiting to make his debut. He loved seeing the success Peralta was having in that outstanding debut performance with his mom in attendance as well. Sonny Gray, no word on whether or not the Cardinals will be shopping him this offseason, but if they're going to continue to look to cut some payroll, they might as well kick the tires on that. And on this date in 20 whew, on this date on October 22nd, 1997, Larry Walker, there you go, wins his first award. The Rockies win their first award in franchise history, the 1997 NL Gold Glove Award. It was his third Gold Glove Award. He won in 92 and 93 with Montreal. And I should mention, too, that I should also mention, yeah, where is that? Patrick, you're losing your mind here. I want to make sure that I phrase that correctly. Larry Walker, first player award in franchise history. Don Baylor, manager of the year in 1995, navigating the Rockies to their first ever postseason appearance. But Larry Walker, Gold Glove in 97, the start of many big things, Silver Slugger Award, first and only NL MVP award in franchise history. Look, it's obvious now, and it's all been sorted out, thankfully. But when it comes to the Baseball Hall of Fame and determining whether or not a player should be enshrined, you have to ask yourself the question, can you tell the history of the sport without this player? And while Larry Walker may not be in the inner ring of the Baseball Hall of Fame with the likes of Willie Mays, Ted Williams, and Walter Johnson and Babe Ruth, Larry Walker is a Hall of Famer. He was everything Todd Helton was and more in many ways. And he was first before Todd Helton. So Larry Walker, happy ending. Can't tell the history of the sport and the Rockies without Larry Walker. He's there. And, it's kind of interesting because Walker gets in 2020, but doesn't get his ceremony until 2021. Helton gets in 2024. They get inducted into the Hall of Fame. The greatest acknowledgement of a player's relevancy or overall impact. They get inducted over a 4-year span right when this team has lost all its relevancy. Imagine losing 119 games this year and still having to debate trolls online about how great Larry Walker was or how valuable Todd Helton was. My God. That would be too much for any Rockies fan to deal with. Would it not? Would it not? In the chat, if there's no Chris Bryant deal, does Bill Schmidt get another year? No. Bill Schmidt did not orchestrate the Chris Bryant deal. That was all that was all Dick Monfort. And he's all but said it himself. That was Dick Monfort's guy. And Bill Schmidt, of course, had to put his spin on it, put his stamp of approval on Chris Bryant. But you have in little over a year, and it probably would have been less if we didn't have the work stoppage after the 2021 and before the 2022 season. You could have had within a calendar year, Dick Monfort trading Nolan Arenado and getting 50 cents on the dollar from the St. Louis Cardinals, and then turning around and giving $182 million to Chris Bryant within a year, within 12 months. You could have had that. But because of the lockout, it ends up being 14 months. So no, the Chris Bryant situation is Dick Monfort's doing, not Bill Schmidt. Now, there was another about $150 million added to payroll that same offseason. $50.5 million for Antonio Senzatella. Kyle Freeland was 60 plus, 70 million for Ryan McMahon. They added Randall Grichuk. That was Bill Schmidt's doing. So they split the blame on the 2021-2022 moves in the offseason. If you want to blame them for some of those contracts, certainly none as bad as the Chris Bryant. Jonathan saying, who do you want for free agency? We've got all offseason to talk about that. There's first base. Bring in a first baseman that can thump, right? I don't think there's anyone ready right now at first base. I don't think you're doing anyone any disservice by bringing in a big first baseman. Josh Bell. Luis Ariz, I'd be wary of because you're probably going to have to give him more money, more years than you should with Charlie Condon waiting and probably ready to make his debut as early as midseason. Yeah. You're right on there in the chat there, Jonathan. Middle of 2026. Yeah. But you can still bring in that first baseman and they can DH. Maybe they can play some corner outfield on top of that. But you don't worry about that. That's going to be a buffer for Charlie if you can have a big bat over at first base. Because now, hey, Charlie, you don't have to rush it. Do your thing. Do you? And you come knocking on that door. You don't have to kick it down even. You just knock on the door and the door is going to be opened up for you and say, it's your time. It's your time. And you could learn under the tutelage of this other really good first baseman, of a great big league first baseman. You're trying to be that. This guy is that. That's how you turn the keys over. That's how you do that. That's really the biggest thing they need to do. But 1-year deals, even 2-year deals, they're all going to be somewhat irrelevant because the Rockies may not get themselves even near 500 until 2028. So next year could be another 100-loss season. Think about that. They win 19 more games than they did this year. They still lose 100 games. 19-win turnaround. You lose 100 games. And then from there, you got to make up 19 more wins to get to 500 in 2027. So 1-2-year deals, all are going to be inconsequential. So honestly, there's no free agent this offseason. There you go. I just ruined my future podcast. There's no free agent this offseason that the Rockies should even really be considering targeting for the long haul. They're really not. And I also don't know that the front office is going to be in a place in which they can figure out if there is a starting pitcher that they could sign to, say, a 4-year deal is going to be a good fit at Coors Field. That's part of the next job of the next front office is, hey, we got to figure out what kind of pitchers are successful here. They sort of figured that out in 2017 and 2018, but that didn't really work for the long haul. They figured out something. They figured that, hey, investing in homegrown guys and not investing in guys from the outside is probably the best way to get a good bang for your buck, because it's all going to be lost money when you're getting someone from the outside, bringing them in for their past success. We don't know if they're going to have any more going forward. So the new front office needs to figure that out, who those guys could be should they go that route again. So this offseason, the biggest thing for them to do is to make trades to acquire young players that could establish themselves in the future. But a guy who's 29, 30, 31 in free agency, why do you want to sign them to a deal that's more than 3 years, a truly a long-term deal? No. It'd be fun. Be fun to say have Nick Castellanos to talk to for the next 3 years, but is that really going to turn the Rockies around? He certainly could be interesting to have in the clubhouse. I don't know that he wants to be losing. Everywhere he's gone since he left Detroit has been winners. Dude likes to win. But we'll get more into that this offseason in general. Final one. Do the Rockies have to buy a Tyro Estrada contract to move on from him? Yes and no. It's not a lot of money. They can choose to not pick up his mutual option next year for $7 million. They can make that choice and then bring him back and have him go through arbitration and make a lot less money. So they were kind of counting on him to be really good this year. And then, oh man, you would have made $10 million in arbitration. Actually, not so fast. Remember when we signed you to a $7 million deal? So that's not going to actually happen. So the buyout is only $750,000. So that's nothing to really worry about too much. That's the cost of doing business. Rockies are going to be paying Jacob Stallings $500,000 for buying him out of his option for 2026 when they let him go. Kyle Farmer, if he doesn't come back, gets a $750,000 buyout. So these are some of the many wonderful things that go on behind the scenes for a professional baseball franchise. Thank you all for dropping by. Appreciate all of your momentum at Patrick D. Lyons on X, at Patrick D. Lyons MLB on TikTok and Blue Sky. And the Rockies Insider channel on YouTube is where you can give me some more momentum. But unfortunately, as you always know, that kind of momentum can only be as good as my next show. So, of course, I'll talk to you then. See you, Felix.